we record these calls, and recording has started. So if you don't want to be recorded, you may want to drop off now. And with that, um, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining for another session of Azure Power Lunch. And we are going to be talking about Azure Local today. So here's a quick agenda. What is Azure Local? What are some of the use cases, queues, and more? And of course, Q&A. So first of all, Azure Local, think of it, it's your Azure footprint in a distributed location in your own data center. Basically, that's what Azure Local is, and it's enabled through Azure Arc. I think we did a session on Azure Arc in the past, so you may want to take a look at it. So that's what it allows you to do. First of all, why you need Azure Local? So these, some of the scenarios that Azure Local addresses, a use case that are addressed. First is the ability to do process the data close to where it is being collected. So, for example, you have this automated grocery shopping where you people don't have to stop at a checkout. They're gonna, just pick the stuff, go out, and you charge for that. That's an example. The second thing is like mission critical workload or the workload where you need near real time processing of data. So, so you don't want to wait for the request going back to the cloud, process and response comes back. You want to close it as in near real time. So manufacturing comes into picture, traffic management comes into picture for that, and in that scenario you need some data processing very close to where you are collecting this data or where you're doing the operations. And one more is the regulated industry or where you have limited connectivity. So, for example, oil rigs or cruise ships. You have you need processing power there, but the connectivity may be limited. Or in some scenario, there are some industries where you cannot move infrastructure into the cloud because of regulations. Okay, so that's where you want to keep certain um, uh, kind of have your footprint close to in your data center, close to where that action is happening. Okay, so these are some of the scenario where Azure Local will make sense, and we will talk about each of those. And in that context, okay. First of all, this um, approach is possible with Azure Arc. Put simply, Azure Arc allows you to manage your infrastructure, especially your compute, virtual machines, and your Kubernetes cluster that are running in your own data center from cloud. So basically, you have a single pane of glass where you can manage that infrastructure. Okay. So and Azure Local, this management is happening or is enabled through Azure Arc as well. So as you can see here, this kind of end-to-end adaptive cloud approach that is possible through Azure Arc. So first of all, if you have your own Azure infrastructure, then that's all good. I mean, you're running in the cloud, you're using Azure Portal, wonderful. Next thing is you have Azure Local. This is your Azure footprint in your own data center, on your own hardware that you procured from a vendor. Azure Local is running on top of it. It's through Azure Arc. You are now able to manage that infrastructure through the single pane of glass. Finally, if you're not using Azure Local, there's your own infrastructure, you're running some compute and Kubernetes, you can still manage it through Azure. So that's basically what it allows you to do is allows you to do the operations, management and security. You can scale applications and uh, you know manage this data in across your um, distributed state. So that's what it does. And let's talk about Azure Local. So the key pillar, as I said, this is the a footprint of Azure in your own data center. That's what it is. And the key pillars are first is the ability to operate and scale, you know, with the power of the cloud. That's the first thing. So put simply, you can uh, you you manage your or work with the resources that you have on-prem, just like you are working with the resources in the cloud. So same way for deploying the VM, scaling out, all of that, same all those capabilities. And then it's not only it supports virtual machines, Kubernetes or containers apps are now the first class citizen, and I will show it to you that as well. And then you have different. You don't have to have the best, all the top of the line hardware. It supports wide variety of hardware, and you can pick and choose what best suits your need. And now you can have the uh, ability to extend the security that you have in the cloud security, to your data centers, distributed data centers, and to the application that is running on those data centers. Okay. Any questions so far, folks? Okay. So this is basically how Azure Local works, and this is their different variation, and I will show it to you on the next slide. This is the Azure Local Connected, where you have always connected to the cloud. So you have it's running in your data center, but it is connected to the cloud. So what you do is you have the hardware, either you bought it, you already existing hardware you have, you just it meets the specifications, and the next thing you do is you deploy Azure Local software. Basically, it's an Azure, the um, Azure Local uh, software or update, whatever that is, you deploy, and that creates an Azure instance in your local cloud infrastructure. And then you start deploying the applications, different sorts of uh, VMs. You may have some container-based application, all of that. And all of this is managed through Azure Arc. Okay, so that's kind of tying it to the cloud and to allow you to see them as first-class citizens. Okay, and here is your question, like, what happens to Azure Stack HCI? We already have a product called Azure Stack HCI. So now we are kind of doing it, making this thing end to end. So it's basically spanning different types of addressing different types of use cases. So Azure Stack HCI is now become Azure Local Connected, and it is you just apply a patch and it will become Azure Local. So this is basically it's GA. It's supported as of now as GA. Then if you have some of the edge scenarios where you need low cost, low spec hardware running at some edge location, that is called Azure Local Edge, and that is currently in public. That's in preview. And then for disconnected scenario where you have either no connectivity or very limited connectivity or periodic, that's the disconnected scenario, and that's also in preview. Got it? So that's that. Okay, so here is what we're going to be in terms of covering. What are some of the specifications? First of all, as I said, ability to operate and scale as with cloud. So you can deploy from cloud, you can scale with infrastructure as code, and one-click updates, and you have the visibility as a single pane of glass, and then not only the ability to deploy VMs, but also deploy container apps, and you will be able to run um, you know uh, uh, app and data and AI services as well. They're in preview. And at the same time, there is a path to migrate. If you have VMware infrastructure and you want to seamlessly migrate it to Azure Local, that option is there as well. Okay. And then there's a wide variety of choices in terms of what type of hardware you want to use, and you can pick and choose based on your needs. The GPU support is there, and of course, the disconnected operations are currently in public preview, or into preview, I should say. Um, and then the one of the thing is security is on everybody's mind, and now you can extend cloud security to your application that's running on those distributed location through the same way you apply to applications that are running in Azure cloud. You know, so that's kind of a very powerful Microsoft Defender for cloud. Network security groups are now available. Ability uh, to have trusted launch. So that's some of the things that kind of um, that's part of that security pillar. So let's talk about operate and scale. Um, with the power of the cloud. So first of all, as you can see here, why like how Azure Local helps. So for example, let's say that you have an organization that is running applications in Azure, but then you have a kind of another distributed location where you have infrastructure there that you cannot move in the cloud for some of the use cases that we talked about, and you have a central team that is responsible for Azure, and then you have a local team that is managing this infrastructure. What it allows you to do is Azure Local, it brings that infrastructure into the Azure sphere. So running Azure Local with Azure Arc, now you're able to manage those servers. As you can see from the diagrams, they are available in Azure portal. Okay. And what you can do is you can deploy these hardware resources with the power of the cloud. And basically, I should say deploy, but treat these physical machines, treat these hardware resources as hardware machines as they are Azure resources. And there is uh, a wizard available to deploy, kind of set up your Azure local environment. And of course, you can take the advanced option to customize, how you want your network, how you want your cluster, how you want your storage for your environment. So that's kind of a fully customizable, as you can see from the diagram. And once again, let's say that I'm taking an example of a grocery store. They have grocery store chain, they have grocery stores spread across different areas, multiple store locations, and let's say that they have hardware infrastructure there that they want to make it accessible through Azure, and they want all the benefits of Azure Local. So deploy Azure Local in one of the stores, set it up, deploying the applications, and now you can repeat that process through infrastructure as code. And just keep in mind, Terraform is also supported. So with Terraform, with if you want to use ARM, you can take that kind of implementation just like you do the cloud. Like, let's say you have to deploy a certain application in multiple location in Azure. What you do is you have that workload in as infrastructure as code in the form of ARM, Bicep, or Terraform. Take it and deploy it in different locations. So that's how you kind of make it a repeatable process, increase the scale. So that's how you can do it across, different locations. So just using Azure Local Resource Provider, and that's a first class resource provider, and you do it across different stores, just like this example is showing. Any questions? Okay, and how about the Azure local update? Because as you know, there are hundreds of updates in Azure that happen every day, or I mean, behind the scene. We are constantly updating the infrastructure, Azure infrastructure applications. New features are being added. So how it is going to be addressed? The way it is addressed is you get a monthly patch, and you can apply that patch on when based on your schedule. So you control when this update is deployed. It's a point and click method, and just keep in mind it's non-disruptive. So if you have your workload running, it will make sure that the way the patch is applied, it is not impacting your workload. So they will be moved around. So that's how it works. And as you can see, this is Azure Update Manager, and you are picking up some servers and then applying the updates there. So that's that. And then, of course, what about the monitoring and visibility to all of these locations? So once again, you have the metrics that are generated by these Azure resources. You can set up alerts, you can set up monitoring, all of that, and proactively see how your infrastructure is doing, just like you do. I'm going to say it again and again, just like you do it with your Azure resources that are running in the cloud. Okay. Moving on to the next one, which is about VMs and containers. So, as I mentioned before, yes, virtual machines are the first class citizens, have always been. And there you can deploy the VMs, you can basically get the marketplace images and you can deploy from that. There's no specs, restriction on specs of the VM based on the host. You can, create different VMs and different specs for VMs and deploy it. And of course, the behavior is very consistent in what you see in Azure Local and what you see in Azure Cloud, proper cloud, and that's that's this familiarity makes the management smoother, simpler, and less time consuming. Okay. And of course, with the VM extension, you can do, security updates and, AD join and run custom scripts. So just like you do it for the VMs in Azure Cloud. Okay. And I just want to mention it. If you have VMware workload and you want to migrate those to Azure Local, you can definitely do that. There is a wizard-based process which moves your VMs in their entirety from VMware VMDK to Azure Arc, VMs, and there's a guided workflow. And please, there's a link in the end if you want to know more about it. Please take a look at that. And let's talk about containers. So containers are becoming more gaining popularity every day. And yes, the customer may start with virtual machine, but they may want to modernize their workload, still staying at the distributed location. They want to take advantage of Kubernetes and Azure. The Kubernetes or managed Kubernetes in um, Azure Local is now a first party citizen. Okay, have full support for infrastructure as code with ARM or Terraform. As you can see, the way you deploy it, you're just deploying a cluster with Azure Arc, just like you're deploying a cluster in Azure. So it's no different. Very, very similar, very familiar interface. That is available, and that becomes the and one of the foundational service. And what happens is now the other services that are running on top, like app services and AI services, they take advantage of Kubernetes as it is the foundational service that is running in Azure Local. And one example that is very common service is Azure Virtual Desktop. A number of customers are using it. And here is an example. Just look at the picture. Azure Virtual Desktop with Azure Local. As you can see in the top diagram, you have the portal. You are running 4 host pools. Two of them, one is running in East US, one is running in West Europe, and the other two, they're running on a custom location. If you click on that, these are running on these distributed location where the customer has Azure Local. So you see, it's a very similar interface. Once again, single pane of glass and the ability to access these resources from the cloud and all that, managed from the cloud. And by the way, Azure AI services, which are local AI search and Azure ML catalog, they are currently in preview. Both are in private preview at this moment. And if you want to know more about it, there is the link. Moving forward, let's talk about the flexibility. So there are hundreds of vendors who are available to provide you infrastructure for you to run Azure Local on top of. There is, if there's a big list. You can take a look at that and see which vendor, if you are planning to take advantage of it, preferred vendor, you can customize hardware and you can purchase, whatever nodes you want to run your infrastructure. Okay. And now the GPU support is there. So basically, you can accelerate with GPU. And once again, either you can have GPU based VM, or you can slice the GPU and spread it across multiple virtual machines. So that's also possible, with the GPU partitioning support, and the live migration and failover is also, and that's something that is new that was not there in HCI stack, I believe. Any questions, folks? I know there's a lot of material to cover, so I may be going a bit fast. Okay. So there is a quick comparison between the Azure Local versus Azure Stack HCI. As you can see here, that there are, instead of like minimum of two machines, there's only one machine required. This is for edge cases. So once again, if you have um, machines that need to run in edge scenario and edge location, and you still and you want them to have Azure Local, so you can have a single pane of glass and all the you know goodies or goodness of Azure. You can take advantage of and the solution. And these are just the example solution. As I said, take a look at the our catalog for Azure Local and see what best works for your need. Okay. And in regards to the disconnected scenario, what happens is there is no connection or very limited connection to Azure, and you are now running the Azure control plane on your on that disconnected location. So basically, since it's not the Azure portal that you're going to be using, you're going to be using an Azure portal that is running the control plane itself, that is running on your on your distributed location, as it's shown in the diagram. Okay, and there not all the services are available. There are a subset of services are available that are there, and this is the example. Look at the URL at the top. Okay, this is not the Azure portal.azure.com. This is your local URL that you are running. Since you are running the control plane, it's a disconnected state. So you are running this portal, and in your distributed location, you're running this Azure control plane, and that's how you are accessing those resources and that. So this is for the scenario where there is very limited connectivity or no connectivity to the cloud. So you are running the control plane as well as the services locally. Okay. And as I said, security is on top of everybody's mind, and it should be. I mean, based on what's happening every day, you should be able to have the, your security being applied end to end. And that's what it allows you to do. So, for example, here, as you can see, now as I said before, that now since you can bring Microsoft Defender to the cloud to Azure Local, it will make recommendation on the resources that are running in the cloud. and you can apply those updates, those remediation, just going through the single pane of glass and kind of addressing those issues. So these are Microsoft Cloud Defender for Cloud recommendation. And as you can see here, this is for an Azure local instance. Okay. And we all are aware that basically the big cause of some of the issues is the RDP port. I mean, those ports are sometimes they are left without any checks, and that's where hackers get in. They take over those machines, and then they kind of move laterally into the network, and they cause significant damage. And that's where uh, network security groups are now in preview with Azure Local. So I'm sure everybody here is familiar with network security group. They are kind of a network ACLing, which allows you to control traffic inbound, ingress or egress from a subnet. Now you can use it in the logical networks, which are kind of a virtual networks counterpart in Azure Local. You can take advantage of those in that scenario and control traffic. So as you can see here, there are two logical networks. One A, which is running our front end, which is of course taking traffic from the internet. Second one, which is the VM, which is running our database and which should not have any egress. It should accept traffic only from the logical network A. That's all it has to do. And how you do it is through NSG, and here is the sample NSG to do that. As you can see here, it's the NSG is only allowing traffic from that logical network A. So this is once again, this is currently in preview. So that's an example of security end to end, and some of the and now we'll talk about the trusted. Sorry, I'm just moving fast a bit. Trusted launch. So now you can use trusted launch for VMs that are running in Azure Local. So that's kind of help you, and mitigate some of the threats that um, that are out there and making your environment more secure. So quick review. We talked about Azure Local, which is Azure Local Connected is GA, but Azure Local Edge and Azure Local Disconnected, they are in preview. The goal of Azure Local is the ability to operate and scale your infrastructure with the power of the cloud, no matter where it exists. The ability to run all different type of your workloads, just like you run them in the cloud, run them in your distributed location, and uh, since there's a wide variety of hardware available, you can pick and choose what hardware should use to run your infrastructure, including GPU-based hardware. And finally, security end to end. Basically using the security or taking the security that you have, like some things like Microsoft Defender for the cloud that you have now, bringing it to the apps that are or running that are apps and services that are running in your distributed location through Azure Local. Folks, yeah, we're right on time. Any questions, folks? So once again, if there are no questions, thank you for joining and hope everybody had a great rest of your day and a great weekend and hope to see everybody next week for another session of Azure Power Lunch. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.